Hi, my name is Angelo Lopez. I'm a Filipino-American editorial cartoonist in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm very happy to be speaking to a wonderful editorial cartoonist from Ohio who also happens to be a good friend, Kevin Necessary.
Hey,
Now,
Angelo.
hey, how are you?
All
You know,
right.
I'm noticing my visual gets darker and gets lighter. I don't know why that's happening, but it's not. If I could figure it out, I would, but I don't know how to do that and stuff. But yeah, but I'm recording in my dad's house and stuff. So yeah, but Kevin had this idea of doing a talk about editorial cartoonists and mental health. And I guess I'm the first person you thought of for this talk. So thank you and stuff. But
Yeah.
over the years, I have gone to therapists when I've struggled with my mental health. So I'm actually very happy to have this talk because I think, talking about mental health and going to therapy is something that should not be stigmatized and stuff. So thank you for that and stuff. So, okay. And so thank you for the idea for the conversation too. Thank you and
Oh,
stuff.
you're
So,
welcome. I'm looking forward to this.
okay. Okay. So I guess my first question just has to do in general. I mean, have you felt extra anxiety because of the second Trump term?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I started feeling anxiety in 2024. I mean, throughout the entire year, I was just on edge,
Yeah.
and I felt like there were a lot of people in my life who weren't taking the idea that Trump could win seriously. You
Yeah.
know, and I kept saying, no, like you have to be on guard. Like it can go south so quickly. So uh, yeah, the anxiety started even before he was reelected,
Yeah.
and it's just ramped up ever since.
Yeah. Yeah. I felt anxiety in the first term. I felt anxiety, but because Duterte was in the Philippines, I was kind of distracted.
Hmm.
Now with the second term, everything so much seems so much worse and
Yeah,
stuff. And because a lot of the things Duterte's or that Trump's doing, Duterte was doing in the Philippines and stuff. But I always felt safe in America because you know, I wasn't worried about Duterte because since I was in the Bay Area, I felt safe. But I don't feel safe anymore and stuff. That's the thing that scares me and stuff. So
yeah.
yeah, and stuff. So
That's yeah, that's yeah. I think that's something that a lot of Americans have taken for granted. You
yeah,
know, well, and especially those who are privileged not to you know have had to deal with anything like racial violence or anything. I mean, a lot of there are a lot of Americans who felt probably naively safe,
yeah,
and now even that's been stripped away. So it just feels everything just feels heightened.
yeah,
And I think there are a lot of people who were probably caught off guard by not feeling safe.
yeah.
Um, and what do you do when when that entire paradigm shift happens and you're not prepared for it? Like it's not in your in your life experience.
Yeah.
So that's probably caused a lot of people to have anxiety and just feel like the ground's just falling out from beneath their feet.
Yeah, yeah. I know with me, I struggle with anxiety anyway without Trump, but
Hmm.
there are times when I've really struggled with depression and stuff. I've really I've really gotten, like when Trump uses the FCC to attack comedians,
Yeah.
you know, or when Trump one of the things Duterte did was his allies would either buy buy up news media or sue journalists, and they get so caught up in the courts and stuff. And I see Trump doing this when he started repeating when Trump started repeating some of the things Duterte did. I kept thinking, the things I used to feel, I used to think that there were guardrails and stuff, the
Hmm.
checks and balances would hold. And I think what scares me is that the checks and balances aren't holding and
Yeah.
stuff and stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know what to
I
say after
mean,
that.
yeah, but I mean, like you talked about, feeling that anxiety when, they started going after late night, satirists. I have had, conversations with cartoonists about that,
Um,
who, you know, who told me like just how that affects them, because this is what we do.
yeah,
And, so it's not a, like this isn't like an, like some sort of academic exercise and anxiety and, being worried about democracy. They're coming after people like us.
yeah,
And yeah, I mean, we are far down, the list from like Jimmy Kimmel or a Stephen Colbert, but
yeah,
we are still within that same sphere. We work within that same sphere,
yeah,
and you can't help but feel anxiety and possibly depression. And if you are like how you and I are, where we already have like a base level of anxiety and are prone to mood swings and depression and things like that, it's even worse.
yeah, yeah. In the first term, Rob Rogers,
Mhm.
I guess his whoever his new editor was got began cutting him out of his paper. Did Ann Telness leaving the Washington Post affect you? It kind of affected me just because I mean, one, Ann is a great editorial cartoons, but two, this is the Washington Post. This was the paper that her block was in and stuff.
Yeah,
And to see so they have this wonderful tradition that seems to be going down the tubes when one of the best cartoonists in our countries you know had to quit, right? And stuff.
yeah.
That caused me anxiety, but it was it was just the start of a long, but because that's directly affecting editorial cartoonists. Did that affect you? You know,
Oh yeah. It certainly did. My natural inclination was just to, take whatever energy that was causing and to fight. So I, like, many other cartoonists, did a cartoon in solidarity with Anne.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I mean, just being a reflective person and, as is my nature, of course, it caused me anxiety, not just because of Anne, um, but it was more that Anne was, what happened to Anne really helped like knock the scales off my eyes in regards to the Washington Post. And,
uh,
like I just was like, oh my God, we've lost this, you know, um, this monumental newspaper that is known for standing up for democracy. And because when you think about the Washington Post, you immediately think of Watergate.
yeah, yeah. I
And
think
and
of all the president's men, right?
yeah, yeah. And I mean, to go from Woodward and Bernstein to what it is now, where it may not be a mouthpiece for the Trump administration, but it has been defanged, and and I feel like you can't rely on that as a place to go for good journalism and for good analysis.
Yeah, yeah. This actually leads to my next question, though. Like just in general, what what um, what in general are some things that may challenge the mental health of anybody working in the editorial cartooning field today? And I guess more specific to you, how do you handle things like trolls and negative feedback and stuff? But you know, either question first and stuff. So, I mean,
Um, well, I think it's easier for me to kind of just to at least start with the trolls and whatnot. I'm I'm lucky, I guess, that my readership has become very niche because I'm no longer working for a news outlet, um, and so yeah, I will, I can kind of craft where I'm putting my cartoons. I'm no longer using Twitter. I'm mostly putting my cartoons on my Substack and my Blue Sky and Facebook, and and the people who are finding me are they are searching for people like me. So,
Yeah.
um, it's no longer like when I was at the Cincinnati Enquirer or at Channel 9, which is a local TV station here in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Um, I was getting a lot more, trolly, comments on social media. And, I initially, when I did deal with people like that, um, I, I wanted to engage, and I think sometimes snark got the better of me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I only felt in danger a couple of times.
Oh,
Um, so I don't know. So I mean, I guess one, yeah. Um, the if I do encounter a troll now, it's usually someone who I peripherally know on like Facebook or another social media,
yeah.
and I don't mind blocking them, or on the rare occasion I'll go off. But yeah, I don't deal with trolls that much anymore.
Yeah.
When when I did deal with trolls, I remember the first time that like someone sent me a death threat. Um,
Yeah.
I I emailed Clay Bennett,
Yeah.
and because I just read something of his where he was talking about like the hate mail that he gets,
Yeah.
and and he works in the South, so he gets a lot a lot of hate mail at a big newspaper.
Yeah.
Um, and so like I emailed him and I asked him like, hey, how do you deal with this? And he sent me the most delightfully uh, you know um, vulgar email, and in solidarity. I mean, just so many f bombs and but like at the very end, he said, like, and always remember, never let the effort see you sweat.
Yeah.
And and I was like, oh, that's how you deal with it. You just, you never, you at least publicly, you never let them see you sweat.
Yeah.
Um, Internally, I had to get to the point of realizing like, I'm never going to please anyone, and if people are going to be mad at me, that's a badge of honor.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things
Um,
in my life is that the people I've been in conflict who want me to shut up have been the people who've been most open about expressing their own views and stuff,
yeah,
and stuff.
yeah,
And so, the biggest problems I've had have been with those people who, they're sort of ideological purists. And if
yeah,
you don't agree with them 100% and stuff, they want you to shut up. So, I don't know
yeah,
if that's to me that I always get the impression that's what trollers are and stuff. And the people who I don't mind if people disagree with me and stuff.
right.
I've had friends from across the ideological spectrum, people who are farther to the left of me and people who are farther to the right of me. But as long as they respect my views and stuff, I'm going to respect yours and stuff. So
The thing that I want out of any kind of conversation or dialogue with someone who doesn't have my views is I want them to come at me you know, with facts, with sources, with, like I want them to back up their argument. And I
yeah,
think that comes from my journalism background.
yeah,
If you're going to be presenting X, Y, and Z to me, show me your sources. I want to see your work. I want to see, where you're coming from with this.
yeah,
Because not only, does that open me up to potentially new information that I may not know, but also it gives me a view into why you are arguing for this, like where you are getting your information from, what your background is. And I think that to me is a much better place to have a dialogue like that. But
yeah,
if people are going to just be shouting, you know, their opinions, and without backing them up with facts, and they're just being angry to be angry or trolly to be trolly, then yeah, I'm going to confront them and I'm going to call them out on their BS.
yeah, yeah. I know with me when I argue, the way I used to debate conservative friends and stuff is I agree with you A, B, and C, but I disagree with you in D, E, and F and stuff. So that, you know, I found areas of common ground as well as areas of disagreement and stuff.
Yeah,
We agree on the problem, we just don't agree with the solution.
yeah,
Now, there was a shift where we no longer agree on what the problem is and
yeah,
stuff. And and I think that's what you're talking about with the facts. If we
yeah,
don't agree with the facts, we won't agree with the problems.
yeah. And that's I think that's a a really big issue that we face now is that it's almost like we have two sets of facts.
Yeah,
We're living in two different worlds, and it's it's crazy, to think that we can't even, agree on that. We can't even agree on what is happening
yeah,
because we've, through just either, being siloed into, different news bubbles or whatever. Like, yeah, so it's almost like you can't have those conversations anymore
yeah.
because, we're just in two different realities.
Yeah. So, things like systemic racism or climate change or um, economic inequalities and, all of that stuff that, when I used to have, in my conversations with conservative friends, they would agree with me, okay, there is climate change, but I think your solution is bad or something. But now we can't, now there's a disagreement on whether climate change is taking place, right?
Yeah,
Or systemic racism and stuff, you know, um, you know, how can you argue that Jim Crow doesn't exist and it doesn't still have an effect on people? Even it wasn't that long ago. It was only 40 years ago that, well, not 40, 50 or 60 years ago that Jim Crow was dismantled and stuff. But, the consequence of that lives on and stuff.
yeah.
So, but um, yeah, I don't know. I'm replaying arguments I used to have and stuff, and
Well,
just talking about it
yeah,
makes it's kind
yeah.
of painful.
It is, I mean, and it is, but I mean, like going back to just people's realities. I mean, if you grew up in an area where everyone is white, and well, Jim Crow never affected you.
Yeah,
If you grew up in you know an area where I mean, of any demographic. I mean, like uh, whether it's racial or socioeconomic or religious. I mean, if you're just, I mean, that community, that's your reality, and
yeah,
outside of that, may not affect you. So if you've never had to deal with anything like like here in this, here in a city, if you're not a farmer, you may not know. I don't know what issues affect farmers. I don't
yeah,
know what issues affect people in rural communities. Um,
yeah,
they don't know what issues affect me and
yeah,
affect my neighbors. And it's a shame that we don't have that common ground.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think you're pointing out something that's, the silo effect, but also just I think there's an urban rural divide,
Mhm.
we just don't know each other anymore and stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm curious. You were mentioning about now that editorial cartoonists are not in newspapers, now that they're all going to Substack, does that leave a sense of anxiety in the sense that when you work in the newspaper, you get a sense of security when you're
Mhm.
now that you're in Substack, you have to hustle a lot more.
Yeah.
That is that a source of anxiety that's just apart from the political part? Is it just that economic in terms of how do I earn a living doing this and stuff, right?
Very much so. And I would be curious to know, how you feel about it as well. Personally, yeah, it is. It's a sense of anxiety because, I don't know how much I'm gonna, make doing editorial cartoons. I, am having to find other, sources of income, which means doing less editorial cartoons. So I, you know, I worry that, I'm not going to be as sharp as I used to be with, with doing cartoons. I worry that I'm not going to have enough cartoons out to justify having a career and justify having a Substack. I worry that I'm going to not find enough freelance gigs, you know, yeah, I mean, it's just all of that is in that same kind of sense of not feeling grounded.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, like for me, it's it's everything. It's the world that we live in, and worrying just about like are we going to live to see tomorrow? Is there going to be you know an escalation in the Iran war? Is there going to be a bigger crackdown on our civil liberties? Things like that, coupled with I don't have a career anymore,
Yeah.
and or if I do, it has to change, and I have to like mentally change, uh, my perception of what a career is. Like
Yeah.
it just occurred to me in the last couple of months that I will never have the security of that 9 to 5 job again,
Yeah.
as a cartoonist.
Yeah.
And I think in my head there was always something that was hoping that at some point I would go back to some kind of semblance of that, of having that regular staff cartoonist job that
Yeah.
I used to have. That's never coming back. So what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my aspirations in my career? What does it mean for just earning a living, with freelance gigs? So it's all tied up in
Yeah.
that.
Is that sort of an existential thing among journalists in general, but then specific to editorial cartoons? I'm different than you in the sense that I was in the Philippine news. I was a community newspaper. This was just something I did on the side. I worked in a library, and now I retired from the library so I can caregive for my parents and stuff. So actually, caregiving is my main responsibility right now. But in retiring, I was able to get a pension because I worked in
Hmm.
the library for almost 30 years and stuff.
Oh
So
wow.
yeah, so I'm older than I look and stuff. So, but, for me, editorial cartooning, I was paid when I was in the Philippine News Today, but that was not my main source of income. My main source of
Hmm.
income was the library. But, for me, some editorial cartoonists got mad at me for saying this, but for me, editorial cartooning was more activism. When I did my editorial cartoons, I was trying to warn the Filipino American community, what Duterte is doing in the Philippines is bad. You got to pay attention to this. And
Yeah.
now we elected Ferdinand Marcos's son. Um, we're, we're really backtracking on our democracy right now, and you guys need to know that. So for me, it was always, I guess it was, I only started thinking of myself as a journalist when I started getting journalist awards. So, it's like I said, hey, if I'm going to get awards, this isn't that bad. But I think an ethnic community newspaper is a little bit different than a mainstream newspaper in the sense that I noticed with David Brown and with Eric Garcia, their cartoons are specifically meant to uplift and defend the African American and Latino communities. And so,
Hmm.
and so when I look at their stuff, they're advocates and stuff. And
Yeah.
I always felt that I was sort of an advocate for issues in the Filipino American community that people are not paying attention to. So for me, I don't know if I'm misunderstanding what journalism is as opposed to activism, but I never found offense in thinking of myself as an activist and stuff. But I may be misinterpreting what that means compared to what editorial cartoonists think. Because when I mention it, sometimes some of the editorial cartoonists get really mad at me for saying that, and I shut up about it because I want the awards and stuff. But but I've never known why considering myself also as an activist was a bad thing and stuff. So does that make sense?
I
Or
yeah, and I think there's I think the reluctance to call oneself an activist, and I'm um, completely speculating here, but I'm trying to make an informed speculation just based on who people I know. Um, I would say that there is a sense of wanting to be looked at as a as a journalist in a very strict 20th century American journalistic way,
yeah,
because we talk a lot about like things like, like news objectivity and, not being an activist, staying very neutral, even as, even if you are a cartoonist working at a newspaper. You were trying to fit into this mold of ethics, of journalistic ethics that emerged in the 20th century you know, um, with American journalism,
Yeah.
where you were very like straight down the middle, completely objective. You weren't showing, an opinion unless you were writing an opinion piece.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there is some, you know, I, that has its place, that has its use, because it does try to hold people to an ideal of being above the fray. Um, I don't think that exists anymore. I think it's
Yeah.
we've already we're already in a post fact reality. I think we need to exist in that space. I don't know what comes after it, but we need to at least acknowledge that it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, when I hear journalists talk, or when I hear cartoonists talk about being journalistic with their cartoons, um, and calling themselves journalists, to me that is an acknowledgement of journalistic practices, which is making sure that your cartoons are backed up with facts,
Yeah.
and that you're not just wildly throwing your opinion out there without backing it up with any kind of fact,
Yeah.
and sources. Um, where I think we should be a little bit more lax is with the whole activism thing, because yes, I think you're right, we are activists.
Yeah.
We are being activists for democracy, or for a
Freedom of the press.
community,
Yeah.
freedom of the press, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think it, in fact, makes us better if we come at it from a journalistic point of view, which is you know sourcing your facts and making sure that your facts are correct, and making sure that you can back up your arguments with
Yeah.
as much uh, with as many sources as possible.
Yeah.
So that's my very muddied way of kind of answering your question.
No, no. I think one of
Yeah,
the things I agree with them, my politics is to the left. But I even though I have left wing politics, I should criticize left wing leaders or liberal or progressive leaders, even though I'm on the left. In the same way that
mm,
even if somebody's to the right, they should criticize people on the right if people on the right are doing something wrong. In that sense, I
yeah,
agree. If that's what they mean by journalism, I agree with that and stuff. So, yeah, but they get mad at me without actually defining what they mean by journalism. So thank you for saying that. I think I've gone through two questions. We got 9 minutes for this first video. So let me quickly ask this question, you know,
sure,
and if we don't have time to finish it in this one, we can go to the next video. But
okay,
one of the things I've struggled with over the course of these past maybe even 20 years is that as the times have gotten more polarized, I've lost quite a few formerly close conservative friends and stuff, and it was very painful. Now, have you gone through a similar process? And if you have, how have you coped? Has that affected your mental health in any way?
yeah, I mean, it has affected some relationships in my life, and yeah, it does affect my mental health,
Yeah,
um, because I these topics are very hard to talk about in just any kind of just surface conversation. I mean, this these past 10 years especially have really exposed who people are,
yeah,
and what people believe and what they don't believe, and you're beginning to get this a sense of people, like what's behind just their exteriors. And that's difficult, and I think that's difficult, to like, if you've had friendships or relationships with family members and you've really never talked about these things that are behind their beliefs. You may have had pleasant times with them, wonderful times with them. It's very hard to now look at those people when you know what they support, or what they now feel comfortable saying.
Yeah.
You just can't, you can't go back to that. And so I don't I it's very hard when I do think about like those relationships, and I just get sad.
Yeah.
um, Not just for myself, but also just for the world that we live in. Like, oh my gosh, people actually believe these things, and
Yeah.
it's harmful to others. And yeah, it's a really hard thing to kind of deal with.
Yeah. I think for me, because religion has always been an important thing for me, I used to have formerly close conservative Christian friends, and
Hmm.
and around 20 years ago, they were trying to get me to break up with the person who became my wife, and that was sort of a last straw for me.
Oh
You know
wow.
how in the divorce, it's not one
Yeah.
thing; it's several things that accumulate over time and stuff. For
Hmm.
me, the final break with those friendships was just them trying to get me to break up with my wife Lisa and stuff. But I think, but that's 20 years ago. In the past 10 years since the Trump administration, and actually com compiled with the Duterte administration in the Philippines, I, I've had two incidences that pop up in my mind. One of them, I went to an old high school friend's, her mom passed away, so I went to the mom's wake, and I met a former dentist and stuff. And when I think the dentist knew beforehand. Before I hadn't seen her in a few years and stuff, but she when we were talking about my editorial cartoon, she mentioned, she asked me if I was if I liked Duterte, and I said no. My cartoons are against Duterte, and the first thing she told me was she was a Duterte supporter, and she made that entire time. I didn't want to I didn't argue with her and stuff, but she made it very uncomfortable for me to be at that wake, because I was at that wake for my old high school friend and stuff. And then I
Yeah.
think, yeah, and then recently, a few years ago, I was in the Sunnyvale Art Club, and one of the members started sending a few art club members white supremacist message emails and stuff. And I
Oh
eventually,
wow.
yeah. So, but then a few months ago, I had an art show, my first art show in a long time. And this person who had sent those emails showed up in my art show uninvited and stuff. And that kind of freaked me out and stuff. I also didn't react. I never know how to react when things like that happen. So I tend not to react and stuff. But
Hmm.
you know, and I was never, as opposed to the old high school friend, the dentist at that wake. I used to be very close friends with she and her husband. I was the first person that they fiddle around. They were in dental school. I was their first victim, right? But I always had good the person who had sent me whites. I was not close friends with her, but we were not unfriendly either. We were just friendly acquaintances.
Yeah.
So when I started getting those emails, it kind of freaked me out. It's like, I don't mind if somebody's conservative, but white supremacist is like you cross a line.
Did she know that it was white supremacist material that she was sending out?
Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
obvious when they
Pretty
say that
obvious.
blacks, gays, liberals, college students are out to destroy the world and destroy this country. That, to me, that seems pretty white supremacist and
Yeah.
stuff. I don't know how you define it, but for me, that's how you define it and stuff. But
Yeah.
you know, when you say that people that you thought was you were friendly with and stuff, do you find out something about them that scares you? Does that make sense with my old dentist? The fact that she liked Duterte in spite of his extrajudicial killings, that scares me. And then with that not acquaintance who began to send who believes that anybody who um, you know, it, we're not out to destroy the country and stuff, you know.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to mention. I don't mind if you're conservative, but if you think I'm trying to destroy the country, I'm not and stuff, you know. I love
Uh,
this country as much as you do. I keep wanting to say that and
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Which, and I mean, and the whole co-opting of patriotism is an entirely different conversation. But um, yeah, I don't know if it scared me in terms of like feeling threatened for my life or my safety, but it scared me in that I like it opened my eyes to the ignorance of some people and the beliefs. And if this is what someone that I respected and I thought was an intelligent person is believing, and they're consuming this material hook and regurgitating it hook, line, and sinker. That scares me. So it's much more of an existential dread, and I don't know how to deal with that. It
Yeah.
just kind of breaks my brain.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
Well, we have 1 minute left and stuff. Let me, you can continue what you're going to say and stuff in
mhm.
the next meeting and stuff. But yeah, I don't, in a minute, I don't think you can say anything too wise.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So,
Blue.
hey. I was curious. First, I want to say, I know any loss of friendships hurts. So I want to say, I want to give my care to you, for the loss of those friendships that you've had and stuff. I know
Mhm.
that the friends that I've lost and stuff, I don't know if I want them in my life anymore because I think some of them have become too toxic. But I have a loss for the friendship that used to be, you know,
Yeah,
when formerly close friends, turn toxic and stuff, even though the toxicity is too painful, there's the memory of when the friendship was healthy and stuff. And so I wish care for you if you're still going through healing for that and stuff.
well, thank you. Yeah, no, I mean it's I think a lot of us are having to expand what we expand our definitions of grief.
Yeah.
Not just through relationships lost, but through the loss of any kind of innocence or the loss of stability, and that feeling of stability in the world or whatever. I mean, it's I think we're grieving. Um,
Mhm.
and I mean, just something that that we all went through together. We all went through the pandemic together. I
Yeah.
don't know about you, but I still grieve the pre-pandemic world.
Yeah.
It like it's wild to think that it's been you know 4 or 5 years since we've really had to think about COVID.
Yeah.
Um, and and yet like that I don't think I don't think it's really registered for so many of us that the world has fundamentally changed.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
and it's very easy to think about like 2019 being yesterday.
Yeah.
um
That's
you know
7 years ago.
yeah, isn't it?
Like
I mean,
almost a decade ago.
it's 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 wild, and we haven't processed that. I know that I haven't processed the lost years and just how much the world has changed and is
Is it
different.
is it that there's so many things that happen almost weekly or daily that it's hard to process something from the past when you're still when you things pop up that still shock you.
Yeah,
Does that make
yeah.
sense or
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
okay, yeah,
um I think so.
okay,
And um and just as like a personal struggle, so I was diagnosed with ADHD a couple of years ago.
yeah,
And something that I learned to put words to was it's a sense called time blindness or time myopia, where I don't really have a sense of time.
oh,
So for me, it's you know everything just feels incredibly slippery, and when it comes to time, especially now that there are so many things happening all at once, and you never really do get a chance to catch your breath.
Yeah.
And so it just, it goes back again, it goes back to that sense of feeling ungrounded.
Yeah.
And it adds to that sense of anxiety.
Yeah.
You don't, I don't know when something else is going to happen.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know much about that, but I'm hoping that I'm hoping Trump slows down so you have a chance to catch up. So yeah, I know with me, I think that's part of my thing. I get my most anxiety when I feel overwhelmed.
mhm.
If it's just one problem at a time or one issue at a time, like that's why when I do my cartoons, I when I research for my cartoons, I try to focus on only a few issues. I try not to focus on everything. Because if
Yeah,
I focus on everything, that's why I try not to just do cartoons based on the current news and stuff, just so I don't get some weeks are overwhelming and stuff.
that's I like that you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Um, Now let me ask you this: do you do that as a way to still get a cartoon out without letting yourself get amped up or overwhelmed by the news, or is that just because you haven't? There's so much flooding the news that you haven't been able to catch up, and so you're just this is just what you've been able to process.
Yeah, I think part of it is something I've learned when I was in the Philippine news today. I like taking deep dives into like
Hmm.
a certain subject. Sometimes something happens in the news, and I'm not very knowledgeable about what happens. I have to take the time to do the research. I don't want to with the Philippines, one of the reasons I do a lot of research on the Philippines when I do cartoons when I was doing the Philippine News Today is because I've only been in the Philippines 1 month my entire life. So I'm very vulnerable to the criticism that I don't know what I'm talking about because I'm an American. So I take a deep dive on trying to research and talk to people and learn about the issues. Just I want to have you were mentioning maybe a few minutes ago that you want to be knowledgeable about
Hmm.
what you're doing your cartoons on, and some issues pop up that I'm just not very knowledgeable about. I want to be
Yeah.
able to do the research. I don't want to have a superficial cartoon on a subject I don't know very much about because I learned that from having friendships with people from different points of view is that I feel a need to be able if somebody questions me about it, if somebody gets into an argument with me about it, I need to be knowledgeable. So on
Yeah.
immigration, I'm knowledgeable, but on some other issues, I'm just not as knowledgeable. Like when October 7th happened and stuff, with the I thought it was terrible what Hamas did, but I was hesitant to do specific cartoons on the Israeli-Palestinian because my focus was on the Philippines. It was not
Hmm.
on so I had to take the time to actually learn about the issues before I can make good cartoons on it. Does
Yeah.
that make sense and stuff?
Oh no,
Some
I feel like that's a very responsible way of going at it.
Yeah, because I had as friends who were supportive of Israel trying to push me in one direction, and friends who were supportive of the Palestinian cause who were trying to push me in another direction. But I didn't have the knowledge, until maybe a few months later to be able to take sides, or not even take sides, but just to know what's my opinion on this,
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
but that's sort of. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I try to do the same thing too. Like if I don't feel knowledgeable enough about a subject, then yeah, I don't do a cartoon on it.
Yeah.
And I will try to, I will try to research as much as possible.
Yeah.
Um, and go down that, try to go down, let myself go down those rabbit holes. Um, and that's, I mean, I've got to assume that, it was difficult trying to be a cartoonist for Filipino newspaper being over here,
Yeah.
in the States. I mean
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
how like how do you um or how did you feel like you were best able to stay in touch with what was happening over there?
I, relatives. I'd ask questions of my dad and my mom, or I went to protest a lot, and I got to connect with a lot of Filipino American activists and Filipino activists, and so I'd ask them questions, and then when then when they gave answers, I would go home and then go to the internet and do the and research to fact check.
Hmm.
And when I found, I started to trust those activists, what they told me, because when I did the fact checking and research, problems were a lot worse than they said often and stuff. So they would, so, it helped. But the way I research is I don't just look at left wing sites. A lot of times there are business sites. If they agree on the problem, that confirmed the facts. A conservative pro business um, uh, site would confirm that uh, economic inequality is a problem, or that corporations are kicking are trying to kick out indigenous people from their lands. If both a conservative business journal and more leftist, they both confirm the problem. That's all I care about.
Yeah.
They may offer very different solutions, but if they, that's the thing that I miss. I use when I used to have conservative friends, they may disagree on the solution, but we both agreed on the problem and stuff, and that was helpful and stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, but okay, but okay. Let me quickly ask my next question. This one has directly to do with mental health and stuff.
Okay.
I'm hoping my other questions had to do with mental health too, but this one does. I mentioned before that over the years, I've occasionally gone to therapists when I struggle with my mental health. And I recently, I think a month ago, I went to Kaiser. They had this program called Murrow, that's a sort of program to help people with mental health and stuff. So, I read recently that in the Philippines, a few journalists have gone to therapists to try to cope. They were covering Rodrigo Duterte's extrajudicial killings and his attacks on journalists. So they went to therapists to try to cope with that and stuff. Now, you don't have to mention any names, but do you know if any of our editorial cartoonist colleagues have also gone to therapists to deal with Trump? And if they have they shared with you, how therapy has been beneficial to them and stuff? I know for me, when I've gone to therapists, it's been beneficial to me because sometimes
Hmm.
I go through it and I'm not exactly sure why I'm going, why I'm reacting the way I am. And therapists help me understand this is why you're anxious.
Um, I have had, cartoonists tell me that they've gone to therapy. I don't know if any of them have gone to therapy specifically for,
From
for Trump. But I mean, I know for myself, I mean, I will often talk about, what, in my own therapy sessions, what, what's going on in the world and try to deal with that both as just a concerned citizen of the United States and of the world, but also as a cartoonist and someone who's, I mean, I am affected by this and by, um, you know, what we do is, we have to, take the news and we have to internalize it. If we're going to be good cartoonists, we have to internalize the news and regurgitate it, through our own perspective and our own lens, and it can stay in there. I mean, that trauma can definitely stay in the body. Um, I mean, this isn't about Trump, but I mean, I remember, it was, 10, 11 years ago, I did a cartoon where, uh, you know, here in Cincinnati, there were a lot of like gang killings, and and one of the side effects of that was a lot of kids were being shot. And so I did a cartoon about, just all the kids who had been shot and injured and killed, as collateral damage for these gang killings. And and I mean, I don't have kids. I don't didn't have, didn't know anyone in those neighborhoods, and yet it still affected me to the point where, like my wife came home and I'm just like pacing around her house,
Yeah.
because I'm just amped up, and I'm feeling, I'm letting those emotions in my body.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, like I can only speak for myself, but like I will talk about this, and I will talk about, not feeling safe as, through what I do and why, in my cartoons, because I don't know if, if someone is going to see one of my cartoons and is going to get upset and want to hurt me. I don't know if someone's going to want to do that to one of my friends or colleagues. I don't know if,
Yeah.
um, there's going to be a crackdown on this, and if what I do becomes illegal. And that is real stress, and those are real issues that I think about on a daily basis. And I'm very lucky that I'm able to have, um, to have a spouse who has a job that has, uh, health insurance, and I can use that for therapy. Not everyone does.
Mm.
Um, you know, um, I'm also lucky that I started doing therapy decades ago,
Yeah.
for something, and so I'm comfortable with doing it. I know not everyone is comfortable doing it,
Yeah.
but you like what you were talking about. It just, sometimes you don't even know what's bothering you, but by talking it out and doing it with a professional who
Yeah.
knows who knows how to guide you through your emotions and asks you the right questions and just provides a safe space to, uh, you know, to talk, and provides, a safe ear to listen. That's very valuable.
Yeah.
Just a few days ago, I sat in on a webinar from the Associated Press,
Oh,
and they were talking about mental health in their newsrooms,
yeah.
and that's one of the first times I've ever heard anyone actually talk about that in terms of journalism,
Yeah.
and um, because I think a lot of us, do try to put up those walls and try to seem like we're invincible, that nothing does bother us because we are having to react to all of this bad news. We
Yeah.
get off a little bit with the adrenaline and, of, the excitement of the news and of being on deadline, but that all that stuff just lives in your body,
Yeah.
and it and it can cause health issues, both mental and physical health issues.
Yeah. And it affects your relationship with the people around you too. I know with
Yeah.
me, sometimes I get triggered, but I don't like even the word triggered. I didn't know what that was until I went to therapy and stuff. Like, and then I would, when I, why is this triggering me? Yeah. Sometimes I don't know and stuff, but I read about, right now, Rodrigo Duterte is being charged by the ICC for, human rights, crimes against humanity. And the journalist from Rappler, it's a Philippine journalist site and stuff. Some of the reporters from Rappler were feeling triggered because because they were covering they were covering the extrajudicial killings. They were the targets of Duterte's attacks against journalists, and one of them mentioned actually that she was going to therapy and she mentioned she and a few of the reporters she knew had gone to therapy while the extrajudicial killing. If you go to a report and you know you see the dead bodies, and then you see the families grieving, and then you hear Duterte call them all criminals, even though in the extrajudicial killings, a lot of times the police would show up, they'd shoot somebody, and they put a sign saying that they're drug dealers. No
Hmm.
proof. They have no chance of defending themselves in the court of law, and only a third of them were killed by police. Duterte said to citizens, if the police are not around, you kill them themselves.
Yeah.
So two-thirds of the extrajudicial killings were by vigilantes. So 30,000, 27,000, 30,000 people have been estimated to have been killed, right? And only a third of them were by police, but by police records showing the killings, two-thirds of them were by vigilantes and stuff. So, um, and the reporters covering them having to go through that, go to the site, see the grieving, see the shooting, see all of that stuff, it had an effect on them and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
It,
but
yeah, I mean, just look at what's just happened here in the United States.
yeah,
Just in the last 5 months. I mean, you've had two people, killed by federal agents. Um, you have an attack on, constant attacks on the press. You know, and anyone can just be labeled a domestic terrorist.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean that has an effect on people. And I've talked with friends who are not journalists, but are just regular people or are in the political world, and they've had to go to therapy, and
yeah.
they have to deal with this. So, um,
Yeah.
and I
I
think I think
I
a
feel
lot of
sorry for
people, yeah.
anybody who's in the trans community or in the immigrant community, any activist who's trying to help them, or even church people. I'm sure they're going through stresses that's scary and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. What were you going to
Oh,
say?
what I was just going to say is I think there are enough people who can see things trending the way that they did in the Philippines.
Mhm.
You know, um, it doesn't take a leap of imagination to see that there could be extrajudicial killings here at some point. Um, just like there were in the Philippines, and um, I mean, we already have extrajudicial killings here in the United States. So
Minneapolis. Yeah.
Minneapolis, yeah. So I mean, it's very easy to see like what's happened in the Philippines, and to see that happening here on some other scale. And that can make you nervous. I mean, you were talking about triggering. I I remember walking into someone's house, and they had a bunch of books from right-wing pundits, just you know people
Yeah.
who have railed against the press and against you know um,
Yeah.
and democracy and freedom of speech, and that was triggering to me.
Yeah.
To go into to someone's house and see those books, and for them to and to know that, like, they know what I do,
Yeah.
and so, like, yeah, it makes me feel unsafe,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's a trigger for me, and I had to work that out a little bit, in
Yeah.
therapy.
Yeah. I'm doing this thing called Murrow and stuff. It's been a month and stuff. I hope it's, breathing exercise,
Hmm.
mindfulness and stuff. It's been helpful and stuff. What I really
Well,
want
that's
to do
good.
right now is sleep.
Yeah.
I just want to sleep regularly. I take a ton of naps now and stuff. So yeah. So yeah, I'm
Well, I
curious.
mean, well, I mean, and I apologize for interrupting, but I mean, you and I have talked, before, of the stressors that are in your life.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, are you? I'm glad that you're able to talk with someone.
Yeah.
Because no person can carry all of this around, and all of these issues, and, like, keep them in. So, like, I'm very glad that you're talking
Yeah.
with someone
You,
and going through these exercises.
I'm curious. When I've had mental health issues, you know, I think throughout my entire life, I was always lucky to have. I went to therapy and that helped, but I also was lucky to have a close social circle of
Hmm.
friends, who like they were sort of a cocoon where if I can go to one to feel safe. Is part of your thing? Do you have that? So you have your wife. I have my wife too. But do you have a close, with your wife? Do you also have a close social circle you can go to? Like you send a message to Clay Bennett, right? do
Yeah.
you do you have that sort of social circle if you don't, if you're in a situation you've never been in before, or if you just want to, along with therapy, is the social circle helpful for your mental health?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, I have my circle of friends, and that's, wonderful to have those people around, and um, it just makes me feel better. And then, on sort of a broader scale, um, I like having that community with other cartoonists, and
Yeah.
knowing that, um, you know, that I'm working towards sort of a common goal with at least some other people.
Okay.
Um, you know, that, you know, we're working towards, fighting for freedom of speech, and that we're fighting for democracy. So yeah, I mean, that's, having those communities is very important.
Okay.
Um, whether we're talking about, you know, deep world affecting issues or not. Sometimes it's just great knowing that I have other friends who are creative and who like to draw, and
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
You can get,
you know,
you get some, sales on good ink, maybe.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask this question later, but I might as well ask it now since you're going to the subject. Why
Yeah.
is a cartoon, especially nowadays and stuff, for an editorial cartoonist, why is it important to be part of a cartoonist community? You mentioned a little bit of it and stuff, but you want to allow, is there any other things you can think of?
Oh, um, yeah, because I mean, we're not islands. We are social creatures. We need to have people around us, and um, I think that's especially important for people like us, where you might be spending hours alone at your drawing table, and and you're gonna be quiet, and you're just gonna be focused on your work, and that's such a singular, insular activity.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, just just with that, I think it's important. Excuse me, important to connect with others who have that similar experience. And then you add in the subject matter that we draw about,
Yeah.
and it's dark, and it's heavy, and it can weigh on you, and we are letting that into our brains and into our bodies. Um, so I think it's very important to have others who have that specific experience on a daily basis, uh, to be able to have that community, and to be able to, uh, to remind, each other and ourselves that we're not alone.
Yeah.
And that builds support. It's, if I'm feeling like I'm, alone and doing what I do, all I have to do is, email other people, other cartoonists who are working in this, same field, or even just look at their art, and just to know, like, hey, they're sitting at a drawing table like me, thinking about the same issues, and I don't feel alone.
Yeah,
Um,
I do
you
that
know,
too, but I get annoyed because they think of better ideas than I do. And I'm
I
like,
know,
damn it, I wish I thought of that.
I know. Oh yeah, it's just like, oh God,
Damn it,
such
I
a
should
great
have.
cartoon. That's a great cartoon. Damn, yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I work that I think it's important that in other countries, in the Philippines, one of the things Duterte did was he sued journalists, or and they get so caught up in courts that it eats up of their finances and stuff. In the Philippines, or not, in India, Regina Taniya, she's a political cartoonist. She got sued by the government for her cartoons and stuff. One of the things, if one of the things that I think is important for a cartoonist is just that support, because
Mhm.
if Trump is going after journalists and stuff, and he's very sue happy and stuff. He's very
Yeah,
happy to sue people he doesn't like and stuff. If you're in a newspaper, you have the resource. The newspaper has the resources to help you out.
yeah.
But if with more cartoonists on Substack and doing freelance work, they're a lot more vulnerable. So I think it's important to be a part of a cartoonist community, not just for the camaraderie, but for the resources. You
Yeah,
you
very
need
much
you
so.
need you need if some cartoonist is being targeted, you need that organization to back them up and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And that, I think that's a very important thing. And, that's something that, um, the leadership at the AAEC has talked about, which is, um, there, right now you have all of these people who are, and I'm not talking about the people who used to be at newspapers and who are part of the organization. I'm talking about people now who are cartoonists or artists or just regular people who have picked up a pen and pencil and have started making political art on their own because they feel inspired and they feel like they have to say something
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm seeing an explosion of this online, um,
Yeah.
and they do what we do. They
Yeah.
may not think of themselves as editorial cartoonists, but they do what we do, and they are just as vulnerable as we are. So I think it's imperative for us to find a way to reach out to them and to bring them into the fold to say, hey, you're not alone either. If
Yeah.
someone does come after you, there is a community of people that are doing this kind of work on a daily basis, and we've been through it before, and we are here to support you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's important and stuff. So, okay. Well, yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. But you know what? Yeah, we're in the 10-minute mark again. So let me ask this question.
Mhm.
When you do get stressed, what do you do and stuff? Do you have any hobbies or activities or?
Yeah. The very first thing I do is I exercise. Um,
Oh, okay.
and I mean, and uh, that sounds like a little bit of a cop out, like, oh yeah, just go out and exercise. But actually, no, it is one of the best things that you can do when you're stressed,
Yeah,
and you can turn it. I think you can turn it into a hobby.
yeah,
So for me, like I'm an avid walker, and I will go out and I'll walk anywhere from 3 to 6 miles a day. And sometimes I'll have a weighted backpack on so that I'm getting a little bit extra exercise. And it's during those times where I'm moving my body and I'm getting like all those like beneficial chemicals in my body going, and that's calming my mind and soothing my anxiety. And I'll put on a podcast or an audiobook or just some music that I know will take my mind off what's going on. And just being outside and getting fresh air and having my body move and getting some vitamin D from the sun,
yeah,
that like that will calm my nervous system to such an extent that no matter what's happening, I at least have a little bit of a better footing to tackle what I'm going through. And I had to, that had become a habit.
yeah.
Um,
That's a good
like I,
habit.
yeah, but like, it's very good. And then, beyond that, I do things like I have a number of TV shows that I can sit and watch that I've watched before that are, you know, things that I can put on just to de-stress.
Yeah.
I will, you know, I'll go and I'll sketch. Like I like doing like urban sketching. So
Yeah.
like I'll sketch buildings and things like that. Um, I'll uh, I used to put together Lego sets.
Oh.
But I've got a
Yeah.
very rambunctious 8-month-old kitten who likes to destroy Lego sets. So so I can't do that right now. But I
Yeah.
mean, but even then, I'll just go and play with my kitten.
Yeah.
And being around friends and you know so yeah, I mean there are plenty of things that I will do to de-stress. And I had to learn how to like put down my phone and
Yeah.
um you know
That's one of
and
the
just
things my therapy's telling me to do and stuff is don't look so much at social media and stuff, especially an hour before you sleep and stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, on this AP webinar that I was a part of, one of the they had like a couple of like psychologists who worked with journalists on this, and they were like, "Yeah, the one thing that we always tell people to do from the start is put down your phone, step away from your work." And they're like, "Yeah,
It's a lot
people aren't
harder than you
happy.
think.
Yeah, people aren't very happy when we tell like reporters, hey, you need to like step back and
Yeah.
like put your phone down." Um, but I mean, that's I would say, beyond any hobbies and beyond anything, that's probably the most important thing. And then yeah, go touch grass, as the kids say. Like get outside, move your body,
Yeah.
do something to distract yourself that's positive and that feels good.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And so, let me check the time. 5 minutes left. Okay. Let's see. My last question for you. Actually, we're getting through with it. Yeah. I only did 7 questions and stuff. So, um, okay, we got all this bad news, and you're saying, what gives you hope right now? Even with all the bad news that's happening in this country, what gives you hope? Or do you have
uh,
any hope?
Conversations like this give me hope. Um,
Okay.
you know, like talking with people and um, having those conversations where that people are concerned, that you're not just rehashing bad headlines, but you're actually talking about like, oh, these are real issues, and we have to think about it. And I don't know what happens next, but it gives me hope that there are people who are paying attention, and
Yeah.
um, you know, I mean, things like Orban not being reelected in Hungary, and
Yeah.
um, just yeah. I mean, as
Yeah.
much as it is hard to kind of like pull yourself up from the muck and to like look around. I mean, the fact that we just went back to the moon. That I mean, I mean, like we're not. I don't think we're talking about that enough. I mean, like that gives
That's
me
kind of
hope.
cool, right? That's
It's
pretty
so
cool.
cool. Like we can still accomplish that,
Yeah.
and and people will be like, oh, well, we did that 60 years ago. Uh, like
It's been a while.
that's it's been a while, but if you think about, I mean, like how difficult it is to just to get to space, let alone get to the moon, and it takes 4 days to get there and back, and that's that gives me hope. That gives me that inspires me.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I agree with everything you said. You know, one of the things, two of the things is the Minneapolis, the ordinaries, and just the Pope.
Yeah,
I never would have thought that the Pope would clash with Trump and stuff. He was the last person I thought there'd be a conflict with, but his kind but firm stand against Trump gave me hope and
yeah.
stuff. I kept on thinking like I'm an ex-Catholic, but I've been thinking lately about going back and stuff, and so I thought yeah, maybe and stuff. So if he takes more stands, I'll be there in mass.
Yeah.
So okay. So hold on. Let me check and see the time. 2 minutes and 50 seconds left. Yeah, like I said, if you put your mouse to the right and stuff, it'll tell you the time. But yeah, yeah. My hope is just yeah. And this is the 250th anniversary of our country, we've had bad times before, but I've been reading books about, I read I'm finishing up a book on, the movie High Noon. The screenwriter of High Noon was in the blacklist
Yeah.
and stuff, and so I'll have to rewatch it again. But it was interesting to read about it that even in this blacklist and stuff time, there were people who took a stand, and
Yeah.
and I've been taking inspiration from two cartoonists from that time, Herbert Bloch and Walt Kelly. At
Yeah.
a time when many Americans were scared, two cartoonists had the courage to go after McCarthy and stuff. And I'm not a brave person, but I try to get courage wherever I can. And those two cartoonists, gosh, you know, who would have thought that a cartoonist would be able to stand up to a demagogue? But two cartoonists did. And
Well,
so,
and I think I think, you may not feel like you're a brave person, but by speaking out, you are, and you can inspire others to be brave too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just in public. I may get to the point where I'll wear fake mustaches and maybe a putty nose
Yeah.
if things get bad.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much and stuff
Well, thank
for
you.
taking the time to talk to me and stuff. It was a good idea, this conversation and stuff. And I hope if there's any cartoonists who are struggling, I hope it helps them. Uh,
Yeah.
there's no shame in going to a therapist and
No,
stuff.
not at all.